was titled, "Is Student Debt a Crime Against America's Future?" Now, I've talked about this before on this program and in other venues. In fact, I've been talking about it for 20 years or longer, but 20 years on the air on this program. And but I want to just give you the ammunition for these arguments one more time, just in case you're new or you're unfamiliar with it, or you know it wasn't at the tip of your mind. The Supreme Court struck down, what was it, a week ago, a little over a week ago, struck down President Biden's proposed $10,000 to $20,000 forgiveness of student loan debt for millions of Americans in debt. This is a particular slap on black women who hold almost 2/3 of all the student loan debt in the United States, which is a pretty shocking statistic when you consider it. Nearly 2/3 of $2 trillion of student loan debt is held by black women in the United States. And the Supreme Court said, nope, not going to do it. Now, clearly, this is the Supreme Court doing policymaking rather than deciding things along constitutional lines. The rationalizations were weak and fuzzy, and you know, they were just doing what the right-wing billionaires who wine and dine them and take them on luxury vacations tell them to do. But and the argument that's being made by Republicans is that forgiving student debt is a slap in the face to those of us who paid off our student debts. And my argument is that, no, it's not a slap in the face to anybody. Paying off student debt is righting a wrong, a crime against democracy, a crime against the citizens of the United States that was committed by Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party over the 40 years following Reagan's presidency. Before Reagan became governor of California, college in that state was completely free. The University of California system, whether it's UC Berkeley, UC San Francisco, UC Sacramento, whatever it may be, UC Davis, you went to college at the University of California, it was free. I mean, there might have been some small fees here and there, but, you know, and in the rest of the country, it was damn cheap. I mean, you know, I didn't go to college very long in the 1960s, but I did. And I could pay my tuition by pumping gas at the Esso station, washing dishes at Bob's Big Boy, and being a weekend DJ at a country western station. It wasn't hard. And with and I could not just pay my tuition, I also paid for my rent. I mean, I've been living on my own since I was 16 years old. So that was how it was before Reagan. And in fact, in the period from 1946 until the late 1960s, when the GI Bill was still active, which was passed by Harry Truman after World War II, we invested an enormous amount of money in our students, as it were, in young people in the United States. And we got back an absolutely massive return on that investment. Now, since that time, since Reagan, we've seen these massive cuts in education. It used to be that 80% of the tuition was paid for by federal and state governments. Now it's 80% of the tuition is paid for by students. It used to be students paid 20%. Now students pay 80%, more or less. You know, it varies from state to state, but more or less. And this is why we have the student debt crisis. And this all happened as a result of the Reagan administration. In fact, this is from Devin Fergus in the Washington Post talking about the early 1980s. Quote, "No federal program suffered deeper cuts under Reagan than student aid. Spending on higher education was slashed by some 25% between 1980 and 1985. Students eligible for grant assistance freshman year had to take out student loans to cover their second year." So this all began in the 1980s. But if we go back to the, you know, how things worked out when my dad went to college on the GI Bill. Now, he didn't graduate. He got 2 years in, and then he dropped out because Mom got pregnant with me. But Louise's dad also, they both came back from World War II. My dad was in the Army, hers was in the Navy. And he followed the GI Bill all the way through and got his law degree and became the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Michigan. My wife's husband, my wife's father, Louise's father. And he did that not only paid no tuition to go to law school at Wayne State University, but he was given a stipend to pay for books and rent, as was my father. The best book on this topic is by Edward Humes. It's titled Over Here, How the GI Bill Transformed the American Dream. And this is how Mary Paulson for the Columbia Daily Tribune summarized the statistics in that book. Quote, this is about the GI Bill. That groundbreaking legislation gave our nation 14 Nobel Prize winners, 3 Supreme Court justices, 3 presidents, 12 senators, 24 Pulitzer Prize winners, 238,000 teachers, 91,000 scientists, 67,000 doctors, 450,000 engineers, 240,000 accountants, 17,000 journalists, 22,000 dentists, and millions of lawyers, nurses, artists, actors, writers, pilots, and entrepreneurs. Free education during this period of time, from the 1940s through the up until the 1980s, literally built not just the American middle class, but also America's technological superiority in the world. In 1952 dollars, the GI Bill cost our nation $7 billion. The increased economic output we got as a result of all those millions of young, mostly young men, there were some women as well, getting a college education on the GI Bill. The increased economic output over the next 40 years that can be directly traced just to those educational achievements is $35.6 billion. Keep in mind, we spent $7 billion. And the extra taxes received from those higher wage earners, because they had a college degree, generated $12.8 billion for the federal government. Again, the federal government invested $7 billion. It generated $12.5 billion extra tax dollars and $35.6 billion of extra activity. In other words, for every dollar that the U.S. government invested, we got back $7 in return. $48 billion return on a $7 billion investment. Plus, we invented the transistor, the integrated circuit, the internet, new generations of miracle drugs. We sent men to the moon. By the way, this idea that college education should be free is not some weird crackpot thing that, Thom Hartmann and a bunch of liberals and Bernie Sanders came up with. This is how it works in every developed country in the world except the United States. And how it worked here in the United States until Reagan came along. Thomas Jefferson created the first free university in the United States, the University of Virginia. He thought it was such a big deal that on his tombstone, which he himself wrote, it's listed as the #1 thing he did. Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act and, or Morrill, or however you say it, on July 2nd, 1862, giving each state a minimum of 90,000 acres of land to sell to establish colleges of engineering, agriculture, and military science. Michigan State University is one of those land grant colleges. There are fully 76 free or low tuition state colleges started by Abraham Lincoln's efforts. Every other country in the world knows this. Right now, there are over 200,000 American students going to college for free in Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Slovenia, Czech Republic, and Germany. Free. Because all of those countries offer free tuition, not just to their own citizens, but to anybody who qualifies for college there. I mean, here in the United States, you have a choice. Well, you don't have a choice, really. If you're a member of the Lucky Sperm Club, if you were born to wealthy parents, you can go to college. Like Josh Hawley, he was born to very rich people. His mom was an alumni. You get these, advantages. But if you're not a member of the Lucky Sperm Club, you get student debt. And you go $100,000 in debt. And then the Supreme Court says, screw you. And what's so really outrageous about this is that Republicans who, and every single one of the Republicans I'm about to name, has come out and explicitly said student debt should not be discharged. You run up a debt, you chose to take that debt, you must pay it off. These same Republicans applied for PPP loans from the federal government and had them 100% forgiven. Matt Gaetz, $476,000, all forgiven. Greg Pence, Mike's brother, $79,000. Vern Buchanan, Republican from Florida, $2,800,000. Kevin Hern, Republican from Oklahoma, $1.7 million. Roger Williams, Republican from Texas, $1.4 million. Brett Guthrie, Republican from Kentucky, $4.3 million. If you're noticing a trend here, by the way, there are no loans and got them paid off. Only Republicans. Ralph Norman, Republican from South Carolina, $306,000. Ralph Abraham, Republican from Alabama, $38,000. Mike Kelly, Republican from Pennsylvania, $974,000. Vicky Hartzler, Republican from Missouri, $451,000. Carol Miller, Republican from West Virginia, $3.1 million. Mark Wayne Mullen, Republican from Oklahoma, $988,000. They just got to keep all that money because it all got forgiven. But they're the people who have, every single one of those names have come out and said, oh, those students have to pay back all that money because it's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. Every single one of them. So, yeah, Republicans are complete hypocrites when it comes to forgiving loan debt, in addition to pushing policies that are just, killing America. $10,000 would have been a start, fixing our student loan crisis, our $2 trillion student loan crisis. But we shouldn't have any student loans in this country at all. If Democrats can take the House, the Senate, and the White House in 2024, we should go back. We should reverse the Reagan Revolution with regard to education. We should go back to free college across the United States, or low-cost college, and we should wipe out all $2 trillion of the student loan debt. It's just the same amount as Trump's tax cuts, for God's sake.